Donna Davies with What the Weather, and along with co-host James Skivers, resident Met John Davies, and our awesome guest today, Mr. Mike Smith, who's been in weather since the beginning of time.
Yes.
And but he doesn't look it.
Back before there were models.
Back before there were
and I
computers.
mean computer models.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. When I walked out from Brian Busby the other day, they were talking about models, and I'm like, "Are you making fun of me?" Yeah. So, but anyways, yeah. So Mike, thanks for coming up to Kansas City, which you're from.
Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit for our listeners that don't know you very well about your background and
Sure.
which is in your book.
Yes.
Which we'll talk about.
I got interested in weather. I'm, first of all, native Kansas Cityan.
Native.
Got interested in weather at the age of 5.
5.
And I knew at 5, for sure, I wanted to be a meteorologist. And what did that was the Ruskin Heights tornado.
I'm sure.
Sometimes it's called by meteorologists the forgotten F5.
Right.
And one of the reasons is for an F5 in a densely populated area, it killed relatively few people. Now you say 44 deaths, how can you say that's few? Well, that was in the era where 100, 150 people could be killed by tornadoes.
Exactly.
But because of a man who recently passed away, Joe Ogsley, he was the hero of the Ruskin Heights tornado. What happened was he was on duty at the Weather Bureau. That was the name of the National Weather Service in 1957.
Yes.
At what was then called Municipal Airport downtown.
Wheeler?
What's Wheeler Airport now, but it was Municipal Airport then.
At that time.
And they had a little tower where the Weather Bureau was located, and they had an old converted World War II radar. And they saw developing northeast of Wichita a little smudge, and they thought, this storm is going to get Kansas City. And it produced a tornado near Emporia, and then a long track tornado that became known as the Ruskin Heights tornado from near Williamsburg up through Martin City. I'm trying to remember the sequence of the towns. Hickman Mills, Ruskin Heights, and then an area, a wide spot in the road known as Knobtown, which was just south of what was then Raytown. It's now all Raytown, but it was known as Knobtown. Then it became intermittent up toward Unity Village and crossed the river and produced its very last damage near Liberty.
Sure.
And that tornado killed 44 people. But the TV stations, especially Channel 4 at that time, it was the news station because it was owned by the Kansas City Star. They did continuous coverage.
Was Dan Henry there then?
No, this was way before Dan Henry.
Oh, okay.
And the weathercaster wasn't even involved.
I see.
See, this is back in the era where they thought weather was not important to viewers. They were, of course, completely wrong. And they hired entertainers to do TV weather. There was no radar in Kansas City. There was really no meteorologists. When I went to the University of Oklahoma, my freshman year in 1970, I was shocked that all of the TV stations had meteorologists, all the TV stations had radar. A smaller market, but far more sophisticated about weather than Kansas City.
Yeah.
And so, but you had Walt Bodine and a number of the other longtime Kansas City people.
I do remember Walt.
Yes, back when they were young, doing the continuous coverage. And even though they were forbidden to issue tornado warnings.
Yeah, because of panic, right?
It was.
They
weren't even supposed to use the word tornado.
No, they weren't even supposed to use the word tornado.
Yeah.
Joe went ahead and issued what we would call today tornado warnings for South Kansas City, and he completely thought he would be fired the next day, but he felt a strong sense of obligation. I mean, this is the guy who was the Navy's meteorologist for Iwo Jima and the Battle of Okinawa.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
then that man knew his business.
he knew his business, and Joe said, I feel a sense of obligation toward my fellow citizens, and he was going to issue those tornado warnings regardless.
Yeah.
And that sort of broke the dam.
Yep.
There were editorials written how wonderful these tornado warnings were, how many lives they saved. There were hundreds of letters that went to the Weather Bureau telling them how many lives they saved. And as I say in the book, the Weather Bureau was dragged kicking and screaming into the tornado warning business.
Right. Because they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to panic. And all
Right.
this stuff. And it's like, nope, things have to change.
That's right.
And it could have been a lot worse. One death is too many. But 44 today would be high.
Yes.
But back then, considering what it could have been.
Yeah, remember, Ruskin Heights was as densely populated then as it is now.
Right.
And almost none of those houses had basements.
Right.
And they were not particularly well constructed. Mm-hmm. They were just nice homes for GIs to raise their families
like
in.
a manufactured type
Right.
home.
Yeah. Right. And so if you run some numbers and use like Waco and Flint, Michigan and Worcester, Massachusetts,
sure.
You come up with probably 150 deaths for the Ruskin Heights tornado based on when tornadoes hit big cities back in the 50s. 44 was a much lower number than what we had. Late 40s, 50s was the era of the triple-digit fatality tornado.
I love your story on Woodward.
Yes. Oh, my gosh. That.
I actually didn't know much about that until I read your book.
Well, the funny thing about the Woodward tornado, and we got to give Don Burgess of the National Severe Storms Laboratory a lot of credit. He did a lot of the basic research.
Yes, I've heard a lot about him from him.
Yeah. But John, of course, knows Don Burgess.
Sure.
And Don is one of the people responsible for the NEXRAD radars and has done a tremendous service for our profession and then again for the public by extension. And so the Woodward tornado was like the tri-state tornado. It was on the ground about the same amount of hours. It was on the ground about the same distance. The difference is that it was in a very, very sparsely populated area, not like southern Illinois, which had a very dense population. And so the Woodward tornado, though, killed, the amount is somewhat in dispute, but it's in the 180s, we think, total.
And it was fascinating. It just kind of went right along the Santa Fe Railroad, too.
And we have a problem in meteorology that still exists today, and I call it the one-off. The Union City, Oklahoma tornado, because it was captured by the experimental dual Doppler radars. There was one in Norman and one in Cimarron, Oklahoma. Okay. And it was the only tornado captured by both radars. This is in May of 1973. Mm-hmm. And Steve Tegmeyer and his wife photographed the entire life cycle. Al Moeller, Chuck Doswell, and several other people was the second chase team that photographed its entire life cycle. So we had this from two radars. We had two different documentations visually of the entire life cycle of the tornado. And we had a one-off. And so it was thought that all supercell tornadoes evolved exactly the way the Union City tornado evolved. That's not true.
No.
There's a lot of variations.
Right.
No, they're almost like snowflakes.
But this is the one-off problem.
Right.
And so the algorithms and the training for the original release of the NEXRAD radar were all built around Union City.
I guess I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And in fact, several months later, Kathleen and I, my fiance, chased the Norman, Oklahoma tornado when it was a supercell developing down near Anadarko.
Sure.
And the interesting thing about it is this was the first documentation of an LP supercell. Or for our listeners who may not be aware, a low precipitation supercell. It has almost no rain. It had a lot of big hail, huge hail, but almost no rain. It had a relatively high base, and that thing was rotating like crazy.
And LP storms can be very misleading on radar because you don't see a lot of precipitation there.
Bingo.
Right.
And so I'm calling in from Chickasha, pleading with them to issue a tornado warning. I called WKY. They did. But the folks at NSSL didn't believe me because it didn't look like Union City. It was a very low, as you say, John, there's not much on radar. And fortunately, the tornado it produced was almost all in open country. It produced some damage to sheds and that sort of thing. Thank goodness.
Yes.
But if I recall correctly, now this is from memory, it may not be right, but the tornado had been on the ground for 9 minutes before they issued a tornado warning, even though people were calling them and saying, hey, there's a tornado. And that's the one-off problem. And we have it in meteorology way too often.
Yeah, when I read papers, I don't like to read papers that are case studies of just one event often, because I think you need to put some things in there to compare it to other events.
Right.
I agree with you on that.
So it's kind of a patchwork of how we got to where we are in tornado warnings today. A lot of hard work was done by very, very many people. In some cases, highly courageous people, because they were risking their reputation and their jobs. Fujita being one of them. There's several others who really went out on limbs because they believed the science showed one thing, but we had a one-off that showed something else. And so science can be messy sometimes, and scientists...
That's not exact. I mean, you know, there's variables always.
Plus, we human beings still have our emotions, even though we're supposed to follow the scientific method.
Thank you. And that's, you know,
human beings have a real ability to delude themselves sometimes.
That's right. And we've all done it.
Yes, we
have. You said you took Kathleen.
Yeah. Yes, there's a story about that.
I do have to ask you about that because how'd you get her to marry you?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you a very quick story.
She was like, he's crazy. What am I doing?
That's right. I took her out in high school one time. I went to Rockhurst and then Grandview High Schools.
Oh, yep.
And so my junior year at Grandview, I took her out one time. I thought she was fantastic.
Oh.
And she thought I was insane. She said all I
sounds like my parents.
All I did was talk about weather. Weather. I even gave her a tornado safety pamphlet that I had written for KMBZ radio, okay? And so I couldn't get her to go out with me again. But then when we both got into college, now we grew up 1 mile apart, so we waited till we were nearly 400 miles apart to start dating.
Of course.
She had some bad dates her freshman year at the University of Missouri. I was a year ahead at the university.
She was an MU girl.
She was an MU girl.
Yeah.
I was in my sophomore year at the University of Oklahoma.
Sure.
And at Christmas, Kathleen said, you know, compared to some of the dates I've been on, maybe Mike wouldn't be too bad. I didn't have a date for New Year's Eve or anything. And so she did it, and she found out, you know, maybe he's not so bad. What I say is her taste in men improved. But
she had to kiss a few frogs to get to the prince.
But that first storm chase, I thought she was going to break the engagement. We were supposed to get married 2 months later, and for the only storm chase ever. Now remember, back in the early 70s, we didn't know what we were doing. NSSL had asked us to do this.
It's all eyes.
That's right, because they wanted to verify what the experimental Dopplers were seeing. But it's the only time the tornado started chasing me. And then there was flash flooding everywhere, and I had to go way around, something like 70 miles out of the way to safely get back home. And I thought, oh, my gosh, she is going to break off this engagement. Meanwhile, she told me the next day she thought it was one of the most fascinating experiences of her life.
And see, that's when you knew.
Yeah.
She was the one.
Oh, she's absolutely the one.
Oh, I think that's gorgeous. I love that.
Yeah,
I
and
love
we've
that.
had 3 kids and
Does she,
2 grandkids.
Has she chased with you?
Oh, yeah, she's chased with me many times.
Oh, yeah.
Now, she has pretty much decided she doesn't want to do it anymore, except in a few.
It's hard. I mean, as we get older, it's just like my back starts hurting after a while.
As far as I know, I'm the only one of the original OU group that's still chasing.
I believe that.
Wow.
Now, I'm probably too old to be chasing. My mother says, when are you going to stop with this silly weather stuff and stop chasing? But I still do it when I think it's going to be an exceptional day. And
Well,
I mean, it's in my blood.
well, my mom always hated me chasing until I got with him. Then she,
Well, he's the best.
and then she's like, okay, now I'm okay with it. My dad, being a firefighter, never liked it.
Oh, I'm sure he didn't.
And I said, well, look at what you do with your
Right.
life. And I said, well, wait a minute. You're a firefighter. A lot of firefighters are storm spotters. What'd you do back in the day? And he said, well, back in the 60s and 70s, we would just sit on the roof and say, radio, hey, Jerry, what you got? Dark clouds.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, that was it. That's all you had. And my dad said, I knew nothing. There was no training.
With no offense to your father, I saw a paper last night for the first time.
Sure.
You know the least accurate category of tornado reports? Law enforcement.
Law enforcement.
Yep.
Well,
Well, why
I
do
would guess
they call
that.
it Sheriff
but-
NATO's?
Yeah, Sheriff NATO's. But the funny thing is, the public does better. 22%, if I remember correctly, of the public reports are wrong. 48% of the Sheriff NATO's reports are wrong. I'm wondering if perhaps, and I did find out, police are not trained in weather at all.
That's been my experience when you talk to them.
Yeah.
No, when NWS would, let's see, now my dad had already retired, but I kept in touch with some of the crew, and they would have them go to the NWS at least, spotters, but they weren't required. So most of them wouldn't show up.
But like at the Kansas Police Academy in Hutchinson, where they train all the police for the entire state, there's no weather whatsoever.
No.
I have checked into that.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you have a little bit of error on the side of caution, so any dark cloud becomes threatening, and that's why you get so many Sheriff NATO reports that don't come in from anywhere else, and nearly half don't verify at all, even though they say there's a tornado there.
Yeah.
Well, it
that's-
sure
sorry.
sounds. I was just going to say, it sure sounds like that's an area that I don't know, the Weather Service and maybe other organizations could address in training those people if they're open for it.
Most
to it.
though actually don't have an interest in it, and if you don't have an interest, then you don't really want to be trained unless you have to.
Well,
And my dad, like I said, I mean, and there is no offense to my dad because he said he didn't care, and no one told him how to do it. So he just said, "Hey, I got dark clouds. I don't know what else to say."
Right,
You know,
right.
that's it. So when I told him what I was doing, he was like, "Little girl,
Don't do it.
we've all been
not,
there.
You're not too old for me to ground you." And I'm like, Dad, I'm in my 20s and 30s. So he's like, doesn't matter. But he didn't like it. However, I'd come over and I'd see him watching a tornado program, and he's fascinated by it. So,
There you go.
but I was his baby girl. So,
Well, of course.
are your kids interested at all?
No. In fact, one of the reasons I delayed selling Weather Data Incorporated was I wanted to give my kids a chance to get interested in it. At no time did I ever, while I took them all storm chasing, etc., I never once tried to force them or influence them. I wanted them to do what would make them happy and productive.
Right.
And so
Good for you.
thank you.
Yes.
I had hoped that one or more of them would have naturally come to enjoy the weather, but they didn't. And I was starting to have some health issues. Plus, at that point, I had owned weather data for exactly 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And 25 years is a long time to be a sole owner of a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week
Yeah, that's a lot.
operation. And there were more 3 a.m. phone calls than you might imagine.
Oh, I'm sure.
Even if we had a train warned, if it was hit by the tornado, even though it stopped, even though everything went perfectly, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the vice president of Union Pacific Railroad wants a full report, and he wants it by 7 a.m. to brief the CEO.
Sure.
Oh, my.
So even if things go right, you're getting a call from a grumpy, because he's been awakened at 2:30, vice president of the Union Pacific or one of our other railroads.
Yeah.
And so I'm having to scurry down to the office and find out what all happened and put a written report together so they have it by 6 a.m. And it's one thing to do that when you're 33. It's another thing to do it when you're hitting 60. And so
I understand.
Yeah. And so I had been approached by several people, and AccuWeather wanted to get into the severe weather business, and it turned out to be a very good marriage. Not that it didn't have some bumps, but it was a very good marriage, and I'm glad I did it.
All companies that do that have, I mean, it's never easy,
Right,
but
because there's always a difference in cultures.
Sure.
Plus, they were 997 miles away, and sometimes things get lost in the translation over 1,000 miles. And but it was a very good marriage, and it took the pressure off me. And the night I retired, Barry Myers, the CEO of AccuWeather, who came to my retirement dinner, in his remarks said, "Mike, I want you to know, I'm going to call you at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning for old time's sake."
Did he do it?
No.
Thank goodness.
I would have been sitting there at 2 a.m. going, what the heck do you want?
I wanted to interject
great.
something just real quick. You
Sure.
were talking about you and Kathleen, your LP Storm Chase.
Yes.
You wrote an article on that in Weatherwise.
Yes.
I think it was like observations of a tornadic thunderstorm or something. I remember reading that, and also the article about Union City,
Yes.
the tornado. And that was back at a time I was trying to decide, well, do I want to become a music teacher, or do I want to do meteorology, or go work
Did you
for
ever
my
know
dad?
that about John?
I didn't know about the music, no.
No, I never talked about that much.
You wanted to be a composer.
Well, we won't get off into that. But anyhow, those two articles are kind of what nudged me over to doing meteorology, even though I didn't think I was very good with math, And you can get through all that stuff if you're interested and determined enough to do it.
Boy.
But yeah, that had a big impact on me, so I just thought I should mention that.
Thank
I
you.
really
I
did.
appreciate that. I started out with an A. I started out with an A for Calculus 1. And if I recall correctly, it was a B for a Calculus 2 and C for Calculus 3 and C's and D's for ordinary and partial differential equations 1 and 2. That the amount of math you have to take to get a degree in meteorology is ridiculous.
Thank you.
it
Now
is.
do you not feel? He
Well,
used to
it
tell
makes me feel better.
When
there
he
was-
was at KU, he threw his calculus book against so many walls.
Oh, sure.
Well, there was one calculus class I made a D in, and I was lucky in most of the physics if I could get a C.
Yeah.
But I got through it.
Yeah. You get through it, and you don't even need it. That's what.
Most of it you really don't.
Right. You need some. You need a
You
little.
need some of it.
But
You need to get concepts in your head
Right.
often more than crunching the numbers.
But there's no reason you can't stop at, say, 2 semesters of calculus and 1 of baby differential equations, and that would be plenty. But unfortunately, they want to turn you into human calculators most of the time, so you can do modeling,
There you
and
go.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that, Mike.
See,
So,
that's why I didn't become a Met. Well, actually, I didn't have a lot of encouragement. It sounds like from, again, reading your book, Warnings, which I do highly recommend, and I will throughout this program. You had a lot of encouragement from your folks.
I
it
did.
seems.
I'm the only one. For those in Kansas City, I'm sure they're aware of Dick Smith Ford.
Yep.
Dad
I've
sold.
bought a few trucks from you.
Thank you. Thank you. You got me through college.
You got it.
Dad sold the business 3 years ago and passed away a month ago. But
Sorry about that.
Dad, I'm the only one of my parents' 5 children who didn't go into the car business. But that was due to Ruskin Heights.
Sure.
And that made such a big impression on me that I wanted to study whatever it was that flattened that neighborhood that I went to almost every day.
I see, and so you knew.
Yeah.
Right then.
Yeah. We were close enough. We had debris in the front yard.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You were just like northwest of the track, I think. weren't you,
Yes,
your
just
house?
north
Yes.
of the track.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Wow.
See,
And
you and him have Mike and John, both of you have very similar backgrounds because his dad was an entrepreneur,
Right.
and wanted him to go into the business,
Right.
And
In
John's like,
Pratt.
and I did some,
fun.
but that wasn't exactly what I was cut out for. So
Well, different strokes for different folks.
That's
and
right.
that differing perspective can sometimes be very valuable when you're trying to discover new things. I took a lot of music in high school. And I think I've seen a number of meteorologists who are very good meteorologists who have a musical background. And there's something about this right brain, left
Thank
brain
you.
thing in meteorology that, part of it is pure science, part of it is gut feeling. And that's true in music. And so
Right.
differing backgrounds can bring a lot to meteorology if people are open-minded and willing to learn from it.
Thank you.
That's
I totally
interesting.
agree. And I've
Wow.
always seen a big correlation between music and science and math. Big time.
well, we had Brian Busby here a couple weeks ago, and he's a very good musician.
Yes, he's an excellent
Yes.
musician.
And then I found out that Reed Timmer plays oboe, is a pretty good oboe player.
Oh, I didn't know- I didn't know
I didn't
that.
know that either. So I mean, there's people out there that
I played
do
the flute.
both.
You did very good.
Yep. I was really good at it too. I was very competitive. I always had to be first chair. So I would practice. My parents would be like, if I hear green sleeves one more time, or something. But I practice constantly. If I'm going to do something, I'm all in.
Yeah,
So-
I'm kind of that way too. There's not a lot I want to focus on, but when I want to focus on it, darn it, I'm
Right.
going to do everything I can to be the best at it.
Thank you. I agree. And oh gosh, John, you want to ask the next question? I feel like
Well-
something wrong with my lips. You keep pointing at my lips.
Okay.
Sorry.
You look fine to me, dear.
Okay.
So
I was
I
like,
think
did I smear it over? My lips are getting dry. Sorry.
that's
But
probably all it is. So
I digress.
well, I think Shauna wanted to talk more about your book, Warnings, and I thought it was an excellent book. I mean, you just take us all through everything from the beginning of Warnings, and you mentioned Joe Audsley. I'm not, if I'm saying his name right.
Yes.
I was not familiar with him at all, and I didn't realize he was such a hero.
He
with
was the
Ruskin
hero of the Ruskin
Heights
Heights
tornado, and you don't find that anywhere else except in your book that I'm aware of.
And
Right.
that's there were two things that got me interested in writing the book. First was the reaction to Hurricane Katrina. I'll never forget this the rest of my life.
I'm right there with you. I won't get off into it, but watching that on TV was incredibly painful.
It was Fat Tuesday, 6 months after Katrina, and Katie Couric was interviewing the then mayor of New Orleans, Ray Nagin.
Yes.
And he was saying what a great job he did and how he wouldn't do anything different. And then Katie Couric said something like, you wouldn't do anything different. You really? Isn't anything you do different? And he says, well, I wish the National Hurricane Center had called me earlier. And for him to blame the Hurricane Center when it did a magnificent job on the storm.
Absolutely.
And Kathleen will tell you this, I literally stood up, I was eating my Cheerios, and stood up and cursed the TV. I was furious.
I do not blame you.
And I said to Kathleen, darn it, everyone takes storm warnings for granted. Someone ought to write a book to tell the story of how storm warnings save so many lives. That, of course, was Fat Tuesday. And I thought of a number of people. Todd Glickman, Dr. Roger Pelkey Jr., tried to talk to people, see if I could get people interested in writing that book, because I'd never had any desire to write a book.
Really?
And so 10 days later, we're coming back from church, and I said to Kathleen, you know what? I guess if someone's going to write a book about the storm warning program, it's going to have to be me. And Kathleen, in her quiet, wise voice, says, Mike, I'm really surprised it took you this long to figure it out.
Good for her.
And so that day, we had our family brunch. I went to Barnes & Noble on Rock Road in Wichita and bought How to Write and Publish a Book for Dummies because I knew nothing about it, read the book, wrote 3 chapters, and they were terrible. And fortunately, my assistant at the time believed in telling me the truth, and Kathleen both said, these are bad. So I took a month off, started over again, and I'm very, very proud of the way Warnings came out.
Oh, I am too.
And my second motivation was exactly what you said. The heroes that no one has ever heard of. We save over 2,000 lives a year due to storm warnings from all storms in the United States.
Of all types.
Yeah. 2,000 lives a year is a lot.
That's,
Yet
that's a 9/11.
We don't hear about that.
Sure. But people know that.
No, we just hear about where failures.
Yeah.
And people weren't warned, or actually they were.
Or they perceived they weren't warned.
Exactly.
But you have people like Dr. Jonas Salk, who developed the polio vaccine, who for much of my lifetime was a household name.
Right.
But no one in meteorology, with the possible exception of Fujita, has ever gotten anything like that credit and that praise. And Fujita had a lot of trouble. There was a lot of envy. The people at the National Severe Storms Laboratory came to really dislike Dr. Fujita.
I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. And let me explain a little bit of that. When Fujita hypothesized the downburst and then the microburst, here's this lab of 40 scientists who were supposed to be studying and discovering new things about thunderstorms. And it was, well, if we didn't discover it, it can't be anything significant. And Fujita had night after night after night, restless, not sleeping, thinking, have I really screwed this up? Did I do something wrong here? And if there is a copy of a publication called Science News, and it wrote an article, Are Downbursts Just a Lot of Hot Air? And it quoted a number of meteorologists saying, we're not so sure.
Well, they were half right.
And so I wanted to tell the stories of these courageous scientists. Ogsley thought he would lose his job. Fujita thought he was going to lose his job and his funding.
I had no idea.
People need to know these stories.
Yes, they do. And I think it's good to hear about people who put the better good of the public ahead of, well, what's my career going to be? Am I going to have a job tomorrow?
Well,
it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing.
I would argue we have that problem today, maybe even worse than we did 50 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's more than just meteorologists
so that's
who have that
refreshing
problem today.
To read about. It really is.
But I do admire anyone that's brave enough to say, you know what? It's almost like I couldn't live with myself if I don't do this.
Bingo.
You know, if I'm going to go ahead and put this warning out, I'm going to do this, and if I'm wrong, fine, I'll lose my job. But if I'm right and I don't do it, then I have to live with that for the rest of my life, knowing what I could have done.
Well, I tell
Do you agree?
Yes, and not only do I agree, I really debated to tell the story of my biggest professional failure in warnings.
Would that be November 19th, 1973? But actually, you did not fail.
I did fail. I failed bad. 5 people lost their lives on my watch before we got the warnings out. In that era, WKY-TV was the station for news and weather. I mean, I'm talking about 60 and 70% shares.
Oh, yeah.
And there were severe thunderstorms in northern Oklahoma. There was an isolated severe thunderstorm in southern Oklahoma. It wasn't a day you would typically associate with tornadoes.
Yeah, particularly in November like that. Yeah.
Particularly November. Mm-hmm. And a storm was moving into the south part of Oklahoma City. I still get emotional when I think about it now. And I went on the air. There were no such thing as crawls or anything then. If you wanted to do storm warning, you had to go on the air. Went on the air, forecast large hail, said the storm has a chance of causing damaging winds. And then I left the lights on. In that area, you had to turn the lights completely out to see the radar. Mm-hmm. and I left the lights on because I had to get started on my 10 o'clock news. This was a late evening tornado.
Sure.
And so I'd spent maybe 10, 15 minutes working on my temperature map for the 10 o'clock show. And remember, I'm by myself, again, back in that era. And the red phone rings.
And wasn't it bad radar too back then?
Well, no, the radar wasn't the problem.
Oh,
the problem was the storm was in the ground clutter of the Oklahoma City NWS, and the radar had several blocks, including a large hangar just southwest of the radar site.
Okay.
And so I got a call on our unlisted phone number from Ray Crooks, the MIC of the Oklahoma City National Weather Service. And he says, Mike, we just got a report of a tornado southwest of the city. We can't see it. It's just too close to us to see it on the radar. What are you seeing? So I flipped the lights out, and it looked like an upside-down candy cane. It looked like a hook echo had formed.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, oh, my gosh. And I said, Ray, I think we need to be safe. I think we need to get a tornado warning out. He said, we're going to issue one now. And I said, I'll go on the air immediately. So I was able to get on the air in about 30, 40 seconds because the camera was already set up and everything. But 5 people died before we could get the warning out. And Daryl Barton, the award-winning National Photographer of the Year award winner several times, went out to a mobile home park that had been hit by the tornado. And there's this man in a basketball suit. Back in that era, men played basketball in short shorts and kind of tight tops, sleeveless and everything.
Sure.
And he comes running in, where's my family? Where's my family? And they're like, well, just calm down a minute. And you knew by the tone of the police officer who intercepted him that his family was among the victims. And I looked at that, and that was before me on the 10 o'clock news. Back in that era, you didn't do off the top unless there was a tornado warning at the time.
Sure.
And so that was at the top of the news. And I was so emotional, I could hardly get through the weathercast 10 minutes later.
Mike, that's amazing.
But redemption happened later that week.
Okay.
Thanksgiving night, I forecast 2 inches of snow for Oklahoma City, Thanksgiving night and Friday morning. No other TV station in the market, nor did the Weather Service forecast any snow. And Fred Norman, the chief meteorologist at the ABC affiliate, was on late because of a football game. And he went on the air and said, you may have heard from that Brand X station that we're going to have some snow tonight. Well, I'm telling you, it isn't going to happen. We aren't going to get any snow at all. And Kathleen had gone to Kansas City to spend Thanksgiving with her family because I had to work the whole time and with my family.
Did he have a vendetta against you or something?
No,
Okay.
he just thought he could
Outmet you.
Yeah. And I kept waking up all through the night at about half-hour intervals, looking out the curtain. And I think the last time I did it was about 3:30, and I went back to bed going, this can't happen 2 in 1 week. And when I woke up, the room was just dazzling. And I thought, could it be? And I pull open the shade. I didn't even roll it up. I just pulled it open away from the window. And there is 2 inches of snow under totally blue sky. And yeah, so I did get a little redemption a few days later. But if I had just stopped worrying about the darn temperature map and would have left the light down, I might have seen the hook echo form and might have been able to do something about it.
Didn't you have, was that a new radar at that point for the station too? So there's probably a little bit of learning how to use it or when to use it.
Yes, the late Jim Williams, who just passed away a few weeks ago, was one of my mentors.
Okay.
And Jim was a genius when it came to radars. In the 4.5 years I worked for WKY, we had 3 different radars. And the ownership of WKY was local. And the late E.K. Gaylord said, whenever there's going to be some big improvement in weather technology, we're going to be the first to have it. And so we kept upgrading. And you're right, John, that was that had an analog video processor on it. And when you flip that on, you could see inside the storms, kind of like Doppler, but not exactly. I mean, you didn't see the wind currents, but it was so high resolution. That radar had a beam width of 0.49 degrees, extremely high resolution.
Okay.
And so that's where I saw the upside down candy cane. You couldn't see it because it was inside the echo. And so you're right, there was a learning curve there, but I still should have been
Was
on
that
it.
anything similar to the? I'm going to butcher this word. And
Attenuation, is that what you're talking
attenuation.
about?
No,
I learned about that from your book.
That wasn't attenuation.
That was the Udall
yeah,
day, right?
that was a problem for the NWS. There is a myth, and again, for people, I hope that I don't offend non-meteorologists who are listening, but there are a lot of people who think 10 centimeters radars don't attenuate. They do.
They do.
They don't do very much, but they do.
Sure.
And this radar was right on top of the Oklahoma City airport, which is where the radar was located. Mm-hmm. You had this block, this hangar to the southwest that they couldn't see around very well. So we were in the better spot. We were in North Oklahoma City. We were in an ideal location to see it. I missed it.
Well, that's,
But I learned.
Yeah,
Nothing like that ever happened again.
I mean, everything is a teachable moment.
That's right.
I mean, look at Woodward 47 compared to what you were dealing with then.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And then gets better, and then sometimes it gets worse.
Yes, it does.
Which leads to Joplin. But I have a couple other questions
Sure.
before we get to Joplin. Hold on one second. Let's see. It says in your book, warnings, you also compared successful warnings and the lower death toll associated with the 66 Topeka.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
which amazingly only 16.
Yeah. That was phenomenal.
And the devastating 53 at 5 Waco, Texas, 114. It's a major sign of improvement,
Right.
you noticed.
Right.
So would you like to talk more about that?
Sure. Topeka in 1966 was about the size of Joplin.
Thank you.
Yes.
Because I want to do a compare and
Yeah.
contrast on those
Both
two.
tornadoes were violent tornadoes.
Right.
Both
right.
went right through the centers of the city.
Thank you.
And you get 16 deaths in Topeka, and you get 161 deaths
yep.
in Joplin.
Right.
And Waco had 114.
Yeah, Waco had 114, but was actually less densely populated than Topeka or Joplin.
Okay.
And Joplin
And there was no warning whatsoever for the.
And Joplin was 2011, where we have all the warnings galore now.
Well, in my book, When the Sirens Were Silent, How the Warning System Failed a Community.
Oh, I
Very
know.
good book.
about that.
Thank you.
Yes. Excellent book.
We learned that too many warnings will
People
bore
don't
people.
pay attention.
They become bored. There's only so many times people will get into a closet or a bathtub and pull a mattress over them, and nothing happens, and then they start feeling foolish, and they won't do it anymore. And so Springfield then and now, the Springfield National Weather Service office, way overwarns on both severe thunderstorms and especially tornadoes. They don't seem to have learned very much from Joplin. The warnings that day said the tornado was going to go north of the city, period. The National Weather Service can claim all they want that the polygon included Joplin, which it did, but if you say the tornado is at Riverton first, moving northeast at 25, and then at Galena, moving northeast at 35, everybody's going to say, and you put towns like Carl Junction
Sure.
in the path cast.
And Carl Junction's north of Joplin.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, John. Yes. And so Joplin Airport, places like that.
Yeah.
People are going to conclude the tornado's going north of Joplin. It's just, that's not hard to figure out. And then after all of this years and years and years of overuse of the sirens. They turn the sirens on for the warning to the north of Joplin, even though Joplin is not included. So people turn their TV on and they hear about the tornado warning to the north of the city of Joplin. Then, as the weathercasters are going off the air, and remember, these are not Wichita or Kansas City quality or Oklahoma City quality.
Right.
I mean, this is a small market weekend weathercasters.
Exactly.
And so as the sirens are turned off, the weathercast resumes to regular programming. The Weather Service issues the tornado warning that does include the city of Joplin. But they say the tornadoes at Riverton moving to the northeast at 25 miles an hour. Again, that says north of Joplin.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
But the sirens were not resounded, even though the polygon now includes Joplin. The people stopped what they were doing, turned on their TV. They were told, this tornado warning does not include Joplin as the sirens are going. The sirens stop, programming resumes, people resume their day-to-day activities, but now they're under a tornado warning, but no one interrupts the TV to tell them. The sirens were silent until the tornado is tearing up houses on the southwest side of Joplin.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is watch the video of KSNF TV that's on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And you hear her talking about, well, a report of a funnel cloud over Galena, kind of in a nonchalant, very quiet way. And then all of a sudden, she thinks she sees lightning, as does the news anchor that's helping her out. And it's not lightning, it's power flashes,
Right.
almost continuously.
They're looking at a tower cam video.
Right, tower cam
Joplin,
video. Thank
right.
you, John.
Okay.
And
you know we chased that.
yes, I do.
Yeah.
I know you chased it. And I'd be interested.
I think we were in Galena at first.
Well,
were we?
no, we stayed east of there.
East of there.
But,
I'm
but
sorry.
go ahead, Mike.
So the tornado is now on the ground in Joplin, and they're talking about a funnel cloud in Galena.
Yeah, on
Yeah.
the Kansas side of the border.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, her whole attitude changes. You can hear panic in her voice, and she realizes that's not lightning, that's a tornado.
It's a power flash.
But she is
not a
completely
tornado.
surprised by it. And she's surprised by it because the National Weather Service kept saying the tornado was going to move to the northeast and miss Joplin. And there's a book called Singing Over Me, written by a lady who lives in Joplin. And they were driving north to a family gathering. They got a call on their cell phone saying, hey, there's a tornado that's going to head north of Joplin. So they turned around, drove right back into the city and into the ultimate
tornado.
path of the tornado.
Right into ground zero.
And hit, right into ground zero. And the husband nearly died from his his injuries.
Sure.
But the point is they were perfectly safe. There was never a threat north of Joplin.
Right.
But everybody thought the tornado was going to go north of the city.
Sure.
And the sirens were sounded in a way that was misleading rather than helpful.
Yep.
And the Weather Service kept saying the tornado's moving to the northeast, and 161 people died.
Well, yes, as we chased it, we actually had to go through Joplin to get on I-44.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what your experiences
Well,
were during Joplin.
we
I'll
actually,
let Shauna talk about it.
well,
a bit.
you talk about before, and then I'll talk about how I felt as we went through downtown Old Joplin.
Right.
And there was people around, and we heard the sirens twice.
Right. They were sound two times.
Right.
They were sound for the tornado
But it was
warning.
way too early.
Yeah, well,
and then way too late.
the first time they sounded the sirens, the tornado warning was not for Joplin.
Thank you.
And then the second,
And that was very confusing when they issued that warning.
Yes.
We
For
read it.
sure.
Yeah.
and then the second sounding of the sirens, the tornado had already torn up southwest Joplin.
Bingo.
So at that point, it's almost too late. I mean, maybe some people toured East Joplin were helped by that, but in most of the city of Joplin, it was too late
It was
when they
too
sounded
late.
the sirens the second time.
And so we did not know it was. And plus, when we were trying to get out of its way, you're hearing the sirens, but you can't see it. We're in front of
Yeah,
it.
it was
just
completely
completely
invisible.
Yeah,
you had
we
the,
could
the
only
rain coming
barely-
up, like you pointed out in your book, and then just the atmosphere was so incredibly hazy that day. It's
Oh,
like
I felt it.
was
We had to
very
drive
hard
through
to
Franklin,
see.
Kansas, which, got demolished in May 4, 2003. And
Right.
that's where my folks kind of grew up. And when we drove through Franklin, I said, it's got that feeling, that smell, that humidity. I mean, you just know this is going to be a bad day.
And did it feel that way at Joplin?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So
we were
both Franklin and Joplin.
Yeah, no, we went through Franklin, and I was reminiscing about the May 4,
Oh,
2003.
I'm sorry. Okay, got it.
And
Yeah,
I
we
thought-
first got on
and in
the storm
Kansas-
near Parsons. I think
and
it
we've
was,
been
yeah.
through a few, and Kansas City May 4th it felt the same way. Like
Okay,
you
yeah,
just knew.
yeah.
I mean, once the warm front went up north, but we stopped out. First we were.
What we did is there was the initial supercell was near Parsons, and it was slowly moving to the east southeast, and it kind of became HP, and it didn't do much of anything. I can think there was a very brief tornado supposedly reported southeast of Parsons, and then we noticed several cells going up very rapidly to our south. So I said, well, if we're going to see any of this, we're going to need to get east and south very quickly. So we drove over into Missouri and then south through Joplin. And we saw something that looked like kind of like a wall cloud on one of the developing cells where they were very close together. And I wasn't clear what was going on. Then we went down through Joplin, and we were far enough away you just couldn't see much to the west. But then they started running the sirens at one point where we had Barons in the car. And we could see the spinners starting to really pick up over just along the Kansas-Missouri border to the west of Joplin. And I said, let's just get south and get out of here because I think something's forming. And so we went down through Joplin, but everybody was very nonchalant.
Yeah, I saw a
You could see-
woman who looked
Yeah.
just like my sister who had passed
And that
away.
was concerning.
And she was just going in out of her car into a store, and I just went. I
They'd
wanted
run
to
the sirens
scream.
once.
I wanted to honk my horn and just say, "Go to cover."
You want to know how nonchalant they were? I believe it was Silver Lining Tours was on
Yes.
Range
Yeah.
Line Road headed
Yes.
south.
Definitely.
Power goes out. There is this wall of black to the west. Roger is screaming, Roger Hill
Yes.
is screaming, we got to get out of here, we got to get out of here, because they knew the tornado was coming to Range Line Road, exactly where he was. Well, just south of where he was, as they floor their vans and head south, there is a line of cars at the drive-through at Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Of course.
And all their lights are showing up very brightly because all the power has failed and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, do these people not realize the siren had just turned off for the second time?
The second time.
Now that area was wiped out. And I'm just, do these people just not conceive of the threat? But then it occurred to me, the sirens had been overused, and so they
just
didn't
ignored it.
Yeah, they didn't attach
And if you're
it.
looking, you're not seeing a
Yeah, they're not
tornado.
seeing anything. And so that's probably, we meteorologists sometimes blame the victims, but what they were doing under that set of circumstances was rational.
I totally agree.
Yes, it
and
was.
We were chasing for the Weather Channel, their first tornado hunt thing, and so was James. And we decided to take Joplin that day. I wanted to go to East Kansas City that day, but John's like, have you seen the EHI down there? We're going down there.
Right,
Fair
right.
enough. But my cousin, she was a DON at not St. John's, but the other hospital behind it.
It's to the south. And I can't
and I
think
can't think of the
now.
name. And
It's
she-
in my book. I can't think of it at the moment.
And
Freeman.
yes, she worked at Freeman. So I was trying to find her as I'm trying to work because I'm like, oh my gosh, where's my cousin? Because I didn't know about the other hospital. And at the time, I wasn't quite sure which hospital she worked at because I think she's worked at both. Anywho, she lives in Arcadia, Kansas, but works in Joplin. So the next day, I finally got a hold of her. And then a month later, we went and did cleanup. We spent half the day helping a guy clean up one of his properties, and then the other half of the day giving out supplies. And I found my cousin. And I said, what'd you do that day? She goes, well, I was at home, and I kept waiting for the call to go to Wounded. And nobody called me. So she said, I just gathered up my nurses and we went to a high school and did walking wounded. Unfortunately, they weren't all walking wounded. Like one guy walked in just fine and then
Right.
and then she
Internal
was
bleeding.
telling me
Right,
about
right.
the after deaths because of getting pelted with mud.
Right, the
and they
fungal
got
infections.
sepsis
Yes.
and all that. And I was like, that's just.
So
she said there is something in our ground here that if you get that in your blood, it's not good. And it was just
And
horrific.
I wonder if some of the deaths after that from the fungal infections have been factored into the total.
They have. That's
I
why
was
mine
curious
is
about that.
161, and
Okay.
some others have it at 158 and 159.
Yeah.
And mine also includes the North Kansas City policeman who died of lightning the next day.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
He wouldn't
Yeah,
have
I
been
heard
there
about
but
that.
for the tornado. That's why I use 161.
Okay. Well, that seems like a very reasonable figure.
The Joplin tornado was a mess.
Oh, it
And
was
so
awful.
and so the question is, what would have happened if the warning system had worked as it should have? A friend of mine called me, who shall remain nameless, but she works for the state of Illinois Emergency Management. And at that time, they had a computer program, a GIS program,
Okay.
that if you knew the intensity of the tornado and its track and you placed it over, the path, sort of a path cast, only backwards, after the fact, it would spit out a number of, an estimated death toll so that they could size the response properly. And she told me when they did that immediately after the Joplin tornado, they came up with 30 to 40 deaths. Now that seems a bit low to me
That seems a lot low to me.
because dense population, even if everything had worked right, probably the death toll would have been maybe 60. So that means we meteorologists have to sort of look ourselves in the mirror and say, maybe 100 deaths that didn't have to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would agree with you with
And
that. I just
wasn't it a Sunday also?
A Sunday,
Yeah, it was
and
a
they
Sunday
had
afternoon.
graduations
Effect on it, yeah.
and
Yes.
all kinds of events going on that day
Well,
too. Which
to kind of illustrate how difficult the tornado was to internalize, to understand, after the graduation was over, the superintendent of Joplin Schools, who has a PhD, drove right into the tornado on the way home. He had no idea that this was a tornado. It didn't look anything like a
didn't.
tornado.
Yeah, there were so many factors there. When they gave the motion was incorrect.
Right.
Because it went straight east
Right.
instead of northeast. And then the visibility was just terrible.
Right.
You didn't see it until it would be
So it was
right
on
on
you.
you or
we
not at all.
barely got a
And-
visual when we were on 44, and all you could see was this big white.
I've
huge
seen your
thing.
picture, and you can just, even
can-
with enhancement,
Yeah,
you can
I-
really
Yeah,
make
and we
that.
really had
we,
to
we looked
punch
at
it.
that. Is there something there? Is there something there?
Yeah,
Because it was
yeah.
really hard to tell. And then we were on 44 there, and we kind of got out of the way, and then we came back later. But it was that was a miserable experience. And just what happened, I never thought we would see a triple-digit death toll from a single tornado in this country, probably during my lifetime again. I thought we'd kind of gotten past that. But this does show that when something forms quickly on the southwest side of a city, and then the warnings are not real precise.
Well, and the
I'm a
warnings
little
are overdone.
Yeah, and I'm a little surprised on the motion too, because the supercell over in Kansas had moved east and even slightly southeast during its lifetime, and you'd think they would note that because that's probably what the supercell in Joplin would do.
Well,
But,
in a way, Joplin demonstrates the value of the warning system.
Absolutely.
Because if you turn off the effective warnings, and certainly the warnings were not effective in Joplin, all of a sudden you go back to triple-digit fatalities.
yeah, you go back to the 1950s,
Right.
essentially. That's
But
a
also, a
good
lot of
point.
people there didn't have basements too. So I mean,
Well, but that's true in a lot of cities.
Yeah.
Not Kansas City is one of the rare cities where most people have basements.
right.
No one in
and that's
Oklahoma
not
has a
guaranteed
basement.
either.
Right.
But yeah,
No one in Oklahoma City or Tulsa or anywhere in Oklahoma has basements. We do in Wichita to a
Right.
fairly decent extent, but then there are cities like Winfield where they've told me there are very few basements in that city. there are almost no basements in Dallas.
Right.
And so there are many cities in Tornado Alley that don't have triple-digit fatalities because they don't have basements. Joplin was sort of a medium on the basement scale. People had basements, but not everybody. And so certainly that played a role. But you can't, no one can, and the National Weather Service has tried, and I think in my lifetime, Joplin is the National Weather Service's worst moment, not just because of the problems with the warnings leading to so many deaths, because of their lack of candor about it.
Right.
I have been pummeled by all the way up to the director of NOAA for writing that book. They have done a lot of unfortunate things. If you talk to a couple of meteorologists, one in Joplin and one in Kansas City, who questioned the quality of the warnings after, they got visits from the National Weather Service saying, don't say this stuff. That's not in the book because I wanted the book to strictly concentrate on the science and the event. But the Weather Service's cover-up of what happened and the poor warnings that day, I think is the lowest point of the National Weather Service of modern times.
Oh, I agree. And if you ever want to write a part 2, I have your title.
What's that?
The Perfect Storm That Never Should Have Been.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It never should. Certainly 30, 40, 50,
I want
60
credit for
deaths.
that if you do it.
Oh, you got it. You got it. I'm working on a third book right now.
Oh, good. I want
Yes.
credit for that, too.
Okay.
Just kidding. I'm kidding.
But I've already got the title for that one.
Oh, darn it. I'm good at titles.
Well, you write
But
well,
good on
so,
Thank you,
we're
John.
looking forward to that.
Thank you, John.
So, yeah.
But yeah, again, Joplin still haunts me. And then, of course, oh my gosh, I don't even know where. Do you guys want to take this? I'm going to have to go.
You need to go upstairs
Yeah,
and
I
get
need
some
a quick
sinus
break. Does
stuff.
anybody need a break? Or
No, if you have any more water, that'd
yes,
be great.
sir, I do. I will go
why
get
don't
that
you
for you.
bring-
Could you boys
Yeah, I'll take
do
over
not
some
talk
things.
about me behind my back because I will
I
hear this
promise, dear,
later
that
and
I
I will
will
come
not.
after all 3 of you.
We will not do that.
Oh my God, I sound like my dad. I lost my dad 4 years ago.
Oh.
And I feel like I'm him. I hear myself talk like him, and my mom, she has bad dementia, and she calls me every single night, and they've been together almost 70 years. Where's your dad? I'm like,
He
He's-
passed in 2016.
he's on the fireplace. I'm looking at him right now. But it's sad. But she's like, well, he didn't leave me for another lady. I'm like, no, he would never. He
my.
loved his little lady.
Yes.
So anyways, I digress. But anyways, you boys, again.
Okay, we'll talk
Okay.
about some
Yeah,
of
I'm
this
going to hear.
Sure.
Yeah.
So just give me, anybody need anything?
No.
Okay. Keep talking, boys. This is awesome.
I'm not hearing myself. There we go.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Yeah, I've been studying high precipitation supercells a lot recently. The May 28th storm over here, Lawrence Linwood, I think that was another example of the warning system and the integrated warning team and the media and warnings and emergency management. It worked very well.
Yes, I agree.
I think we were also very lucky it didn't make a direct hit on any town. If it hit Lawrence or Bonner Springs or gotten into the KC metro area, I think we probably would have seen some deaths. But there were no deaths from that.
I was chasing that storm with Kathleen.
Okay.
We saw the funnel clear back east-northeast of Lebo is where we saw it before it touched down for the first time.
Down there just just east of Emporia. There. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Sure.
northeast of Emporia.
Northeast of Emporia.
But it very, very quickly became rain-wrapped. And we chased it all the way up to, what is it, Highway 59 that goes north-south through Lawrence?
Yeah, it's 59.
We got all the way to 59, and we said, we're not going to see anything. It's been invisible. I mean, you could see the curtain of rain that had the tornado in it.
Big curtain of rain.
Right,
that
big
came
curtain of
around,
rain.
yeah.
And we finally said, no, we're just calling
Smart.
the chase at this point.
Very, very smart. And I guess a question I have is, I think HP storms are maybe a lot more common than some people understand. Reading about Waco, I understand that was a rain-wrapped tornado.
Yes.
And I don't know if you have any comments about warnings with HP storms and how warnings maybe can impact the outcome of the situations.
I would rather try to warn on a classic supercell or an LP supercell more than I would an HP. And the reason is HP seemed to produce a lot of false tornado detection signatures.
Okay.
That you see the rotation, you see the gate to gate. Sometimes you'll even get a little bit of debris being kicked up by it, but it'll end up being a much weaker tornado than you would expect, or no tornado at all.
Okay.
Joplin, I think, is worthy of a lot more attention in that it was an HP that managed to produce NIST says it was an upper F4. The Weather Service says it was F5. I say, who cares?
Yeah, it was terrible.
But it managed to produce this very, very strong tornado that wrapped up very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And it did so in an area with an STP of 7, which is very high, but it was a very tiny area of 7. Why is it that this storm was able to do what it did when on other days with an STP that high, you get an HP supercell and it produces a ton of hail, it produces flooding rains, but it doesn't produce a tornado, even though it's got a good couplet. And so I in a lot of ways, and here I am being critical again. I think you'll agree, having read my book, that it's a huge boost for the National Weather Service and meteorology in general.
Yes.
But the National Severe Storms Lab really should be called the Oklahoma Severe Storms Lab. Now, I appreciate Vortex Southeast and some of the other things they're trying to do, but let's face it, for the first 40 years of its existence, if a tornado, no matter how newsworthy or important scientifically, occurred, if it wasn't in Oklahoma, NSSL didn't study it.
It didn't get studied, sure.
And they often, the May 3, 1999, they call it the Kansas-Oklahoma outbreak. And you remember they devoted an entire issue of
weather and forecasting.
To that tornado.
That's a journal, an AMS journal. Yeah.
Yet there's not one map of the tornado tracks in Kansas. There's not one paper about the tornado tracks in Kansas. And the reason I bring that up is because the Hayesville supercell, that was a fatal tornado. And
yes, I was working at KSN that night, part-time for Dave Freeman.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking
about.
So
I know exactly. I was there while this was happening.
How often, John, do you get a F4 tornado that's moving from south-southeast to north-northwest?
Very good point, because it was going almost due north at times, and even slightly northwest. And I don't know how to explain that. It didn't make sense with the soundings and the wind profiles in that area. I have no explanation for that.
But you see, it was 30 miles north of the Oklahoma border, therefore it doesn't get studied by NSSL. And I pleaded with some people at NSSL starting the week after. I wanted to give them a little time to catch their breath from what had happened in Oklahoma, and said, look, this is an important storm. This is a HP supercell that did not perform the way we would expect.
Exactly.
And you learn something. An NSSL person, after April 26, 1991, they had the prototype Doppler in Norman, and the algorithm showed a donut over the Red River Hook Echo, or the Red Rock,
Red Rock tornado in North Central Oklahoma there.
And he says to me, Mike, with this algorithm, there's a tornado there. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, the Hook Echo and the couplet would tell you there's a tornado there.
So tell us something we don't know here.
Yeah, and so my problem is they've had this tendency to look at the storms over and over that behave in a classic manner. But we need more help with the storms that don't behave in a classic manner.
I am right there with you, Mike. And like with HP storms, I think that I don't have statistics available to me, but it seems to me like that may be the dominant mode in the eastern half of the United States.
Yes.
And take the May 28th date.
Why am I not hearing myself? Oh,
there you go.
And Missouri. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Missouri too. Gosh. But like May 28th, that's kind of an unusual storm. I've got a paper. I don't know if it's going to get published. It's in the electronic journal of severe storms meteorology. I'm working on it, and tour group.
Right.
Roger Hill's group got hit.
Right.
There was a tornado embedded within it was occluded way back in the RFD that hit them.
Right.
And then another, the actual Lawrence tornado was forming to the north of that from a different mesocyclone. Yeah. I guess all I was going to say was that that's an example of a fairly HP storm where you had a EF4 tornado that was on the ground for like 28 miles.
Right.
And you don't get those around here that often. I mean, you get a lot of HP storms. And so it's interesting, why did that tornado stay on the ground for 28 miles, and it was almost completely rain-wrapped most of the way, except on the backside. You can kind of see it if you're in the right position. And so I guess all I'm saying is I think more research needs to be done on unusual cases, also high precipitation supercells. Why did the storm behave the way it did? Why is the structure the way it was? That one actually had two tornadoes that actually merged, and then that's part of what my paper's about. But I guess all I'm saying is I agree with you that there's a lot of stuff out there that's not Oklahoma standard Kansas stuff that needs to be looked at.
That's right.
And
I think for now, we've done about as much as we can do looking at tornadoes from classic supercells.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the challenge is the tornadoes that occur outside of the Great Plains, and the HP supercells that behave in these weird manners. And I also think there's a problem. I have refereed a number of papers in recent years. I think now that I'm retired, they think I'm a good person to review papers.
And that you have the time to do it, maybe, but you probably don't.
I don't, but it's partly something I feel I should do to sort of pay back the profession.
I think that's awesome.
That has been so good to me. Yes. But some of these papers, I've told a couple of paper authors, look, you need some originality in this. We don't need the same thing studied over and over and over. And so I'm hoping that we'll get some good papers out of Vortex Southeast, and I'm hoping that we will start. Well, let me back up. So we have Vortex Southeast, and we're launching Raywensons at College Station, Texas, and Monroe, Louisiana, and from 2 mobile laboratories that are launching Raywensons. And the theory is the more Raywensons that are launched, the better the forecast. But that's just a hypothesis. We don't know that that's true.
No, we don't.
It needs to be proven.
Yeah, and I talked to one of the principal researchers in Vortex 2, and I said, are you planning to do some data starvation runs where you run the mesoscale model with all the special soundings and everything you have in there, and then you go back and run it a second time with, say, only the conventional sounding network, and see if, in fact, the forecasts improve and how much they improve, so we can figure out a...
Wow, that's great.
We
yeah, that's a very important point.
I love that.
If the forecast gets much better, then I would argue we need to do 4 soundings a day routinely, now that we're in the era of mesoscale models.
Right.
And that some of these huge gaps, like the southeast Texas coast, where there's no Raywenson from Lake Charles to Corpus Christi, in an area where the Gulf moisture comes up, we need to put some RAS sounders on oil platforms in the Gulf. You know, those sounders give you winds as well as temperature profiles. There's all kinds. If we find out by looking at a whole bunch of cases, not a one-off, that the forecast gets significantly better with more data, then darn it, that's a small cost compared to what the United States pays for other things.
Thank you.
But we don't know. If we eliminate the NOAA jets, for example, on hurricane forecasts, we need to be doing with the NOAA jets, with all the data that they're producing from dropsons and everything, we need to run the mesoscale hurricane models. and see what happens.
Yeah, does a little more data in there in important points, does it make that much of a difference or not?
Yeah, does it improve the forecast or not?
And I don't think you can just assume that at all.
No. I would argue, I'm sure you've seen some of these 1 kilometer models, and some of them are terrible. And the theory has always been, well, we don't have enough soundings and other data to make it work at 1 kilometer. And that may be true, but it also could be a bad model.
Yeah.
And we don't know until we run some of these data starvation type experiments. But as far as I can tell, we're not doing them. And so
that's a surprise because that seems like a very important thing to do.
It is. But you see,
like a no-brainer.
Meteorologists and scientists in general always want more data, more data, more data, more data, more funding, more funding, more funding. Well, you can't be all things to all people. At some point, you have to figure out, where is the money best spent? And so as far as I'm concerned, we need to kind of stop looking at the classic supercell in central Oklahoma and look at some of the things we've talked about, the HP, the Eastern United States, the data starvation studies. There's plenty out there to research, but as far as I can tell, we're not doing it.
Yeah, wow. the Dixie and Gulf Coast really kind of get the shaft on studying tornadoes and stuff. And most of those are either HP or they're just uber fast moving.
Right.
You know, and very destructive.
Well, another problem with the NWS's service assessment with the April 26, 2011 outbreak, are you all aware of the power failures?
Are you talking about like where I guess the storms in the morning went through and there were power failures that affected sirens and other things later in the day with the big part of the outbreak?
Tuscaloosa had no power when the afternoon F4 went through. None.
And I was not aware of that at the time. I found that out later.
Yeah, they could not see the TV. The sirens didn't go off in Tuscaloosa when you got this F4 tornado going through the city. And that was true all over Alabama. I had a woman from rural northeast Alabama tell me that their NOAA weather radio was knocked out. They even though they had batteries, the NOAA weather radio was knocked out. They had no power. They couldn't see the stations in or hear the stations in Birmingham. There was so much static. They could hear the stations in Atlanta. Apparently, there were a couple of stronger signals, but Atlanta wasn't talking about Alabama.
Right.
And so
it was out of their jurisdiction.
But again, you look at the service assessment, and you don't see anything about this. And so it's like we're sort of stuck in 1995, and we're the Weather Service is talking about this new 1 minute warning update.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I've got that on the piece of paper here. They call it warning on forecast.
Yeah,
or whatever. I was going to ask your opinion on that.
First of all, I think it's a bad idea for several reasons. There's some good things in it.
Okay.
But the big thing is they want to do it to 30 minutes. They're making a big deal out of doing this to 30 minutes. All of the social science research that we're spending millions and millions of dollars on says 13 to 15 minutes is the perfect lead time. And there is considerable...
Totally agree.
Yes, there is considerable research that says if the lead time is more than 18 minutes, deaths go up.
Bingo.
Because people will not stay in that black closet or in a bathtub for a very long period of time. So
totally agree.
So the Weather Service wants to do this polygon thing that moves every 1 minute. Now, another question is, how can it move every 1 minute when the radar doesn't observe every 1 minute?
Great point.
And if you look at the Weather Service's predictive arrows that come with the little package of algorithms with it, they often have bad directions.
Yeah, when we're out storm chasing, I very rarely pay attention to the movement given on a warning,
right?
Because so often it's very different than what it turns out to be,
right?
El Reno,
So what's going to happen is you're going to have towns that are in a tornado warning for 4 minutes. And then they're out of the tornado warning for 2 minutes, and then they're back in the tornado warning for 10 minutes, and it's going to confuse the heck out of everyone. So for those two reasons, I'm against it. I think warn on some of the technology they've developed and some of the ideas are very good, but they need to rethink what it is they're doing. Otherwise, why the heck are we spending all this taxpayer money on social science if we're going to ignore it?
Very good point, Mike. That makes a lot of sense. Wow.
That's why I've been chipping away a degree in sociology.
Ah, good.
Yeah, because I'm at the point now where I'm more interested in groupthink. Either from Mets and of all sorts, and to people why some pay attention, why some don't.
Right.
Why, and I'd like to do some studies someday or something. But until then, I mean, you don't necessarily have to have a degree. It doesn't take rocket science to kind of figure out when you look at things. If you just kind of take it all as a puzzle, pull it apart, put it back together, and just interview a few people. I think one of our issues is also we've got, not globalization so much, but cross pollination. I don't know, where people are moving from California to here, and they don't understand our weather.
It's a very.
I would freak out in California if there was a earthquake.
Oh, then move to
Because I don't
Wichita.
know
You'd
it.
freak out because we have earthquakes there.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah, I know.
Now we do. Yeah.
But one of the things to think about, Shauna, is that in the United States, we are not only a mobile society, we have many ethnicities that we didn't have 50 or 60 years ago.
Right.
And I won't get into the politics of this, but we still want to take care of everybody and give them the information they need to save their lives in
agree.
a tornado. Now,
May I interrupt you?
Sure.
You mentioned that in your book about, did I write that down? Where there was a bunch of there may have been more because they didn't count the African Americans.
Yes. Yeah, that's the tornadoes back before the 1950s. African Americans were not counted.
Right.
And like the Tupelo tornado that nearly
Elvis.
killed baby Elvis,
Right.
may have killed 400 or 500 people. We just don't know. And they buried the African Americans in mass graves.
Right.
So there's no way to go back now
When
and
I read
find
that,
out.
I was like, wow. And by the way, see, I was right. I told you Elvis's house got hit. They didn't believe me.
Yeah. We almost
guess I learned something
We almost lost Elvis in a tornado.
Yeah.
It's amazing what you find when you're doing the research for when you're doing the research for writing a book.
But that's really sad how they handled. Oh, that just makes me sick.
Of course, it makes you sick, and it should. But one of the keys to reaching everyone is the excellent social science work being done. I don't remember the exact number. It's in When the Sirens Were Silent. But if I recall correctly, the Joplin tornado warning was 440 words. That is longer than all 4 stanzas of the Star-Spangled Banner.
Wow.
And most of it is unnecessary. The Greensburg tornado warning put out by Mike Umscheid of the National Weather Service
Great
in Dodge
job.
City.
Uber chaser Umscheid.
Right.
That's what I call him.
Umscheid is a great guy, very smart meteorologist.
Love that
He
boy.
is.
You know how many words that tornado warning was? 96.
I was going to say, it wasn't very long.
Yeah. And so
And he didn't mess around. He
Right.
went straight to the point.
you talk to Laura Myers and a number of the researchers, and they tell you without any doubt whatsoever, 440-word tornado warnings are a very bad idea. Yet we're now 9 years after Joplin, and we're still putting out 400-word tornado warnings.
Pay attention to 400 and
And they
really?
didn't. And
Right.
that's why you get 161 deaths.
Bingo.
But that is exactly my point.
I
If
agree.
the Weather Service is going to make a weather-ready nation, it needs to focus on its core mission, and it needs to use the social science research and find out that the white bread guys like Mike Smith respond to warnings in one way, and perhaps Black Americans, Hispanic Americans,
Right.
Vietnamese Americans.
Especially if they don't speak English.
Yeah, I don't know the answer, but the social scientists do, and they need to pay attention to it because we need to make sure we warn all of these people effectively.
Exactly.
And warn on forecast 30-minute changing every 1 minute isn't a step in the right direction.
No, that's too little information, and it changes too fast to where people are going to get just more confusion.
Yes.
Like we need any more confusion than we already have.
Right.
It becomes like whack-a-mole at that point.
Right.
Excellent analogy. I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to steal that one.
And I noticed in El Reno, this poor family, they didn't speak English. And they heard the warning. They were on I-40. And the mother and a baby got sucked out of the car and perished. But I think, if memory serves, the father said that they got the warning mixed up because it was all in English, and they were trying to decipher what it meant, via Spanish. And they thought the timing was different to their language, and so they thought they were okay. And of course, I don't think they saw it until it was.
But you see, El Reno, that's HP Supercell did not behave the way it was supposed to.
That was
That
supposed to
one
go northeast
very
at
unique.
25.
Right. And
And it wasn't supposed to be HP.
Yeah, and it went southeast for quite a while, and 90 degrees different from what it was supposed to be. And you overwarn the people of the western Oklahoma City area, and you create huge danger with people fleeing on highways because
You
of
and
the
I
more
got in a
tornado.
debate about that on Highway 4.
Yeah,
Because I was like, why are all these people? I thought maybe they let out a venue.
No, they don't have basements, and they panicked after seeing all the damage and death in
And I know
Moore.
Morgan's a friend of yours, and no offense, because I watched his Moore, and he was spot on with that. I did have a problem with him telling people to go south because I thought it's too late. It's too late.
Yeah, I think the idea of evacuating for a tornado is something whose time has not yet come.
Thank you.
We might, in the future, with mesoscale modeling and the right data inputs,
That'd be great.
10 years from now, be able to say, you know what, folks, if you are in northern Cleveland, northeast Grady, northern McLean, and southeast Oklahoma City, we've got a real danger here in 4 to 5 hours.
Right.
If you wish to drive out, now's the time to do it. But you can't have to do it now because you cannot wait.
Right.
It's just like you can't wait till the hurricane gets on top of you.
Right.
And so,
Ooh, I like your analogy. I'm going to steal that.
yeah, feel free. And so my point is, I also think the tornado. I presented a paper in 2013 at a AMS conference, severe weather conference in Nashville. I think the tornado watch program is overdue for a complete makeover. I mean, let's face it. I showed a tornado watch from the year before that Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Winfield and Wichita, Kansas were in the same tornado watch. That our state of the art is far better than that today.
It should be more precise.
Yeah, and we need smaller watches that are out for 3 or 4 hours. We don't need these gargantuan tornado watches that Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, it's just too big. And
they're over-encompassing, and they give people too much information that's not of any use to them. And that's where the confusion comes from. Oh, I thought I was under a tornado watch, and meanwhile, they don't even know the difference between the watch and a warning.
Well, I think most people do know the difference between a watch and warning in the central United States, in Tornado Alley.
Oh, you'd be shocked, Mike. I did a video called Surviving the Storm, What Chasers Want You to Know. Because I thought the best way to learn how to prepare yourself, like from criminals, is to hire a criminal.
Right.
So we, all three of us and a couple others, worked on this for a year. And I actually did on-the-street interviews. I did rural, Kansas City, up north, and then I did urban to see if there was a difference. And some knew, and some had no idea still.
Really?
Really. And this was right after Joplin. And they're like, oh, I get those mixed up. And I said, why? And they said, because they both start with a W.
Bingo.
Yep.
That's why we need to change the names, too. That was in the paper.
And Busby, or do you Busby mentioned real quick, he gave me a good idea, and he said, why I think people get it mixed up and heard it from somebody else is if you get pulled over by a cop and they're not going to get a ticket, he gives you a warning.
Right.
So I think he said, and I went, oh, because I just can't wrap my brain around how people can't understand the difference because I'm a weather girl. But that makes sense.
Well, I have proposed to SPC as part of this watch reformation that I think 5 levels is slicing the bologna too thin. I think
He says the same thing.
I think we should have four levels of hazards in their outlooks, and
At the most.
Yes, at the most, and they should be named. Let's see if I can remember them.
I can't remember the 5 or 6 or whatever the number is.
It's
Sorry.
It's marginal,
Yep.
enhanced, high, and extreme.
Okay.
That's what
you can't.
That's what I
you
came up
suggest.
with.
Okay.
Because if you
I like that.
if you tell people today there's a slight risk of a tornado, to the general public, that's downplaying it.
Right.
Slight to the general public means you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Whereas marginal, enhanced, high, and extreme maybe gets issued once every 1 to 2 years. It's very rare.
Okay.
High gets, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, depending. 2011, it'll probably be 10 times that year. Yeah. Whereas a year like, 2016, it might be issued twice.
Okay.
But I was against the 5 categories. I didn't think we had skill at it. Yeah. There's good evidence to indicate we don't have good skill at it. I think we need to change the wording, and we need to change the number of categories.
That
James,
makes
didn't you have
a lot of
something
sense.
you wanted to say? Oh, I thought you pulled the. I thought you were going to. Sorry.
Which conference did you present a paper? What year was that?
It was
I need to look that up.
2013
and
in Nashville.
Nashville, okay, because it sounds like you've got some very good ideas there.
Yeah, and if I still have, if you'll remind me, John, send me an email, and if I still have the paper, I think I do, I'll be happy to send you a copy.
Okay, well, I
I'm
appreciate that.
sure he'll be all over that in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
because to be honest, you two are very similar.
Yes, we are.
I just say.
Yes, we are.
I mean, I always kind of thought so. But boy, you're both.
I think Mike's better at expressing himself, and
no, but you're both. The way you
together.
talk privately is exactly what he's saying.
But you know why? You know why that is, Shauna?
Because he works for you.
No. No. It's because we've been through the ranks.
Yeah.
We talk to the public, whereas you go to Weather Service headquarters, you go to certain cities, I'll go ahead and say one of them, Boulder, Colorado, and some of these places, and they only talk to each other.
That's it.
And they get these ideas like changing a 30-minute tornado warning every 1 minute is a good idea. And it sounds good in theory. But can you imagine if after 60 years, we, the public, don't know the difference between watch and warning? Can you imagine the nightmare that educating this warn-on forecast is going to be?
Terrible.
No one is going to understand it.
No.
We need simplification. We need fewer words. We need more targeted products. We need people to listen to what the social scientists are saying. They're saying a lot of good stuff. Or, as a taxpayer, if we're not going to pay any attention to them, then we need to stop funding it.
Thank you.
We're just wasting money right now.
I agree. And plus, it's making broadcasters' life a living hell.
I hear from. I hear from.
I mean,
yes.
All the emails and the phone calls.
Yes.
Well, we don't understand this. What does this mean?
Well,
why are you doing this to me?
You will find 2 emails from me to the National Weather Service when they began NWS chat saying you have not thought this through very well. And now, if you talk to TV weathercasters about NWS chat, you'll be pleasantly surprised if it's not an obscene response. Chat is falling apart. The servers don't work half
We've
the time.
heard that from other guests.
I've heard that from a couple meteorologists.
And chat works great on a day like today where there's no severe weather, no blizzards, no ice storms, no tornadoes anywhere in the country. But it doesn't work on the big weather days, which is when you need it. And the problem, again, it's another one-off thing.
Right.
They try it in one office, and it works. But then they don't think about what's needed to scale it up nationally, who can be on it, who cannot be on it, and it just turns into a giant mess, and it fails. That is another one-off problem.
Well, a lot of those things start as pet projects, like at
Yes.
somebody's desk, and
Yes.
it's just on a spare server desktop sitting under their table, and it works great. And then you go and you deploy it out, like, hey, let's let everybody try it. And then it grows and it grows and it grows, and you have several people managing it across offices. But as far as just the user base, but nobody's really maintaining the infrastructure because it was a pet project. Now I'm sure they probably moved it into something more data center proper once it evolved. But where's the funding at? Where's the fund?
Right.
Where's the government fund for the server for that
Part
thing?
of the problem with the Weather Service is they can't spend $5,000.
Right.
They can spend zero, fine.
Absolutely.
And they can spend $5 million and up, fine. But they seem to be unable to go out and buy a couple of new servers that with today's capabilities would handle it.
Or just shove it in the cloud.
Yeah.
Anymore. But, it's government infrastructure. They're not going to want that in the cloud for security purposes, I'm sure.
But my point is that too many of these people are only talking to each other.
Right.
And they're not talking to the public. And one of the reasons John is as brilliant as he is because he's talked to the public. And that's why he sounds like me, because I've been talking to the public. And one thing about commercial meteorology is, believe me, if you fail the client is not going to spend their money with you.
Right.
And so we have a very high level of accountability. And if we do crappy warnings and forecasts, we go out of business.
Exactly.
And the Weather Service doesn't seem to be able to figure out that those of us who are well-intended and try to give the Weather Service good advice are giving that advice not just from a scientific point of view, but because we talk to the public. And I think we understand it better than a lot, not all, but better than a lot of Weather Service people.
Oh, I believe that. Absolutely.
And there tends to be this kind of a, I don't know how you put it, almost a competitive thing, or you're trying to step on my turf.
Right.
Tell me what to do. And there's egos that get involved in
Well,
that too.
A lot of egos.
Because I don't want this podcast to sound too negative.
Yeah.
Let me be very clear about something. The National Weather Service is the biggest bargain for the taxpayer of all federal agencies. Now, there are other federal agencies that are quite good, but the Weather Service, dollar for dollar, delivers an incredible quality of service for very few dollars.
You got a lot of passionate people back there that drive.
Oh, they're great people.
Absolutely.
They're great people.
Absolutely.
Now, sometimes their passion causes a problem, i.e. when passionate Mike Smith in the private sector doesn't want them sending... Well, for example, why the heck is the Weather Service sending 4 meteorologists to a NASCAR track? NASCAR pays for pencils, and they pay for the doctors. They pay for the ambulances. They pay for all of this safety stuff. But somehow the weather stuff is supposed to be free.
Yeah.
And that's absurd. That's nothing but corporate welfare. The Weather Service shouldn't be doing that. The Weather Service should be focusing on great forecasts and excellent warnings for the public at large.
That's perfect, Mike. It's just like a big concert too.
Mm-hmm.
They should have that should be private instead of using the National Weather Service.
Right.
And then of course the private can get it and correlate with NWS.
Right.
But it's their job because they're being paid. It's time to call this before a tent comes down.
Right.
Or whatever.
Stage.
Well,
or stage,
yeah,
a whole
fair.
stage. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah,
the Weather Service has enough to deal with just, every
Well,
day.
you got a lot of think tank mentality for one, and for two, you've got a lot of manuals that say what you can and cannot say with the Weather Service.
Well, the problem with the Weather Service at its core is they want to be all things to all people.
Right.
They should say to themselves, We have three constituencies: emergency managers, broadcast meteorologists, and private sector meteorologists.
Right. And a lot of them, I think, are going that way. Like with the spotter training, I know Springfield and now NWS Kansas City Pleasant Hill have switched their spotter training to just emergency managers, broadcast media, and they're cutting out the public. So like your nurses, your people from nursing homes, they don't get to, I think they might be maybe working a special online thing for them to get their training, but the county people are the ones that are getting the one-on-one now.
But think about it. Why do you want the head of a nursing home trying to interpret radar and making his or her own unique decision? If they're in the polygon, they need to be taking
If the weather radio on her desk goes off,
that's right.
That's when you take action.
That's all they need to know,
and
right?
I'm 100. So we're clear. If a business, say a nursing home, can use the weather services stuff for the public at large, great. They don't need to hire a private sector meteorologist.
Right.
But if you need someone on site or you need something special, the weather service should say, sorry, that's not what we do. That's where you got to go get AccuWeather or the weather company or one of these other companies.
Yes, you're going to have to hire
then you
someone.
have issues like with the hurricane situation with nursing homes, where they had the flooding and nursing homes needed to be evacuated. I mean, those people probably shouldn't have been there to begin with.
Correct.
But you've got a lot of these like mom and pa nursing homes that haven't been gobbled up by a big corporate entity yet that can't, they're barely floating along as it is, waiting for an acquisition group with enough money to come in and buy them out.
Well, if you're going to go into that business, you need to have insurance that will cover the evacuation.
Big time.
You need to have business interruption insurance, which will pay you so that if you have to send them somewhere else, you continue to get your weather stream or your revenue stream.
Yes.
Something I do now in my retirement is I coach scientists who want to start businesses. Good. There are lots of scientists out there who have some great, important, marketable ideas, but they don't have any idea how to do it. And many of them think, if I just put out a sign that says Acme, Acme flu or coronavirus. Let's see. I'm thinking this up as I go along. That people are going to find it, but that's not how it is. You have. Right. I asked one. Have you got your liability insurance? Mm-hmm. And he looked at me. In fact, this has happened more than once, but one in particular. And he looked at me, and he didn't even know what liability insurance was. So if someone slips and falls, and he wasn't incorporated, so if you're not incorporated or an LLC, they can go after you personally.
Oh,
he could have his entire retirement wiped out. He could lose everything.
Wrongful death lawsuits left and right.
Yeah, and so I've said, guys, you got to know business 101 and 102 before you worry about reinventing the wheel. Right. All of those basics are vital.
I was going to say, even I know that, and I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer.
Well, but scientists tend to be as a group, tend to be introverted. And the introverted personality doesn't naturally seek out advice outside of the area that they're passionate about.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
So what I can do is I can teach them all the mistakes I made because I made every one of these mistakes, and that way they don't have to.
It's a great part about being a pioneer, isn't it?
Yes. I'm still pulling arrows out of my back, and I've been retired nearly 2 years.
Well, speaking of pioneers, I ironically we got a Twitter from John WX SAV me from wife 1955 at Gmail.
What's this now?
Okay.
You're talking about me?
It's like a joke. John Weathers saved me from wife 1955. But you mentioned Wichita earlier.
Yes.
And you've had dealings with Wichita. What was that like?
Oh my gosh, what a brilliant man!
He met him once, but that would be. He's in my top 5 if I could ever meet anyone.
Oh, and he should be. Mm-hmm. But I proved the existence of the downburst with a series of photographs in July of 1978. His paper was in Monthly Weather Review of February 1977. I'll never forget reading that paper. And it made so much sense. Things we were blaming on tornadoes, where there was no hook echo, no sign of a tornado, mobile home parks that were destroyed. And we had one the previous August. In August of 76 in the southeast part of Wichita. And we sort of called it a tornado for lack of anything else. But this made all the sense in the world to me. And so when I took the pictures, and they're in Warnings, that book.
Yeah, you've got a good picture in there.
And so Fujita called, I sent him the pictures. He was so excited when he called me back. And that began a friendship. He did not speak English very well, but you could understand him. And he was kind enough to come to Weather Data twice. Yeah. And both times he did training sessions, and the second one was unbelievable. It was right after his Hurricane Andrew study. So he updated us on all of his tornado research, and he updated us on his Hurricane Andrew research. And I invited the NWS and McConnell Air Force Base and the other TV stations. So we sort of turned the TV studio into the Fujita classroom that day. And then Kathleen and I took him to dinner.
I am so jealous.
Yeah, Kathleen and I took him to dinner at one of Wichita's nice restaurants that night. And then he went the next day to a severe storms conference in San Antonio. But Ted, what a mind. Oh my gosh.
And he seemed like such a friendly one, too.
He was. I mean, but he was sometimes hard to understand. So it took a little bit to realize, he's not being, plus he was kind of shy.
Well, yeah. John, didn't you have one encouragement?
Well,
that was a Heston.
With the Heston Gossel thing, and I sent him stuff about the two tornadoes and how it looked like they merged, and so they came down and resurveyed it, and he made up his own map.
What your secretary said.
Oh, well,
he was working for his dad.
I was working at Pratt at the time, and I think I'd sent this envelope of stuff to him, and I didn't know if I'd hear back from him or not. And I get a secretary buzzes me and says, "There's a guy on the phone. He sounds Asian. I think his name's Fujita or something."
Did you say I can't understand him?
Yeah. Then I got on the phone. I really had to work to understand him, but he was very friendly and very, very gracious to talk to. And I think I talked to him twice on the phone, and then I met him one time when he was up here in Kansas City doing a presentation, and he was quite a man. What can I say?
You're a Fujita. Really. You're second tier Fujita. Sorry, because you're.
No, I'm probably about fifth tier.
One of the things about Ted, he always had an open mind.
Right.
If you showed him data
he
that
came back and
indicated something was incorrect, Ted would change his mind. Whereas we have too many scientists these days who are tunnel vision, closed-minded. Ted wasn't that way at all.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Mike, because he seemed to always adjust his thinking to what the data was, and he just came up with wonderful ideas.
Whereas today, a lot of researchers, and I won't mention names, or ones that aren't but act like they are like, no. I said this, and I will not, and this is the way it is, and I'm not going to listen to your side. And it's like, well, then how does progress get made?
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Thank you.
That's
because it's like everybody has got to listen to everybody. That's how we make things better.
And try to get the emotion and the pride and all of that out of it.
Right.
We got to get back to understanding that a nullified or disproven hypothesis is scientific progress.
Thank you. I agree.
Great thing to have.
I agree.
Gotta have it.
And being wrong isn't being wrong. It's what I call a teachable moment.
Right. Yeah, sure. I haven't been right all the time by any means, but
I haven't been right half the time today.
What?
So, yeah.
But one of the things I do on my blog is I hold myself accountable. And if a couple of days after a major forecast, especially if I have differed with the conventional thinking on a storm, I'll go back and verify it. And if it's wrong, I'll say it was wrong.
Good on you.
And so there were people asking just the other day, there was this 10-mile wide band of 8 to 13-inch snows in central Kansas. Yeah. And had to shut down I-70 between Salina and Ellsworth.
Right.
And Craig Wood, a meteorologist from Michigan, sent me a note saying, well, how well did you forecast this? And so I put up my forecast, and I said, well, we gave it a shot. And I said, somewhere in central Kansas, there was going to be more than 4 inches of snow that would fall very quickly, but I was too far southwest. Now, the good news is 10 years ago, we never, ever would have had any inkling that something like that snow band was going to occur. Oh. But the problem is you not only have to get the occurrence right, you got to get the location right. And with a 10-mile wide band, and that's all it was, to the northeast up in Saline and Dickinson counties, they got 0 outside that band.
The zones in the winter are just, especially around here, are just so difficult. That's why I don't even try to forecast winter. I just don't, because, you know, like we thought this week we were going to really get smacked, and nothing.
Yeah.
Nada.
Somebody on a commercial air flight got a really good aerial view of that band, of what's left over. And it's 10 miles, if that, in his location.
Wow.
I mean, just very narrow. It's like, wow, that's some perspective. And if you can forecast that pinpoint,
well,
I bow to thee.
But I'm not taking any great pride in this, because the public is going to think, what the hell are those guys doing? I got 10 inches at my house. You didn't forecast 10 inches. But we did get the idea somewhat that there was going to be, as I said on my blog forecast, there's going to be more than 4 inches, and it's going to fall very quickly somewhere in central Kansas. So we're making progress, but there's definitely a 2 steps forward, 1 step back aspect to it.
Oh my gosh, it's so difficult.
Could I switch gears back to warnings for just a moment?
Sure.
There's one other question I had for you, Mike. I was wondering, it seems like in the last few years, cell phone technology, and I don't know how much the FCC has to do with this, but they push warnings to telephones now. And we'll be out in the field somewhere, and I get a warning for right where we're at, where I didn't used to get that on my phone. And I was wondering if you
flip top.
Well,
say that again. I'm sorry.
Sorry, he's still on flip top.
I still have a flip phone.
Okay.
I use her Apple phone sometimes, but anyhow. What I was going to say was, I was wondering, do you think cell phone warnings are helping, and do you think they might replace sirens at some point? You know, because
yes and yes. I think they're helping, and I think they will replace sirens. But this is another case where the Weather Service and the FCC stepped into an area where they didn't need to. AccuWeather's warnings. And so that we're clear, the tornado warning you get from AccuWeather is from the NWS. Mm-hmm. But it also has a small buffer around the polygon. Okay. I want to say 1.5 miles, but don't hold me to that. I don't know exactly what it is.
Somewhere around.
You know, well, I haven't done it for a couple of years. Remember, I'm retired. Right. And if you're not in the polygon or that, you don't get a warning.
Get the warning. Okay.
Whereas I'm driving to the doctor's office last August, and there is a flash flood warning for all of Butler County. I would argue that you shouldn't issue flash flood warnings for entire counties that large, but they did. And my cell phone in Wichita, 4 miles from the Butler County border, is screaming at me, flash flood emergency, blah, 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 blah. And there's nothing. Mm-hmm. And AccuWeather didn't give me that warning because it didn't apply to me. Okay. But the FCC NWS did. Right. Now, they claim that there was this latest upgrade of the WEA technology that they're going to, not give routine flash flood warnings, that it's going to have to be a dangerous situation flash flood warning, number one. Okay. And they claim they've improved their cell tower software where if you're miles away, your phone isn't going to go off. But again, AccuWeather had this problem solved. And as I understand it, some of AccuWeather's competitors have it solved. There's no reason for the Weather Service to do this. Mm-hmm. But you see, the Weather Service wants to be all things to all people. And trying to keep up with cell tower technology and cell phone technology, there are people in the Weather Service who says, why don't we do an app? I can tell you this from watching AccuWeather's app. there are a million brands of cell phone out there, and you've got multiple operating systems. You have the Apple iOS, and you have the Chrome, and you have the Android, and you have Microsoft still has one. And all of those have to be updated constantly.
All the time.
And bug chased and everything. The Weather Service doesn't have the resources to do it.
No.
And so the Weather Service should stay out of it. What the FCC should have done is allowed people like AccuWeather to go through a process of demonstrating the quality of the app and then allow it to scream at you like the WEA warnings do that wake you up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, almost like a warnings-based API where they can, somebody can write an app or maintain that privately, but pull that data in.
Right, but you see, that becomes your nighttime tornado alarm, sort of like your smoke alarm.
Right.
But the problem with WEA is it goes off at 2 a.m. and it doesn't need to go off. There's no threat for that area.
My mom used to get annoyed at that.
Right. Whereas with AccuWeather's, you're either in the polygon or very close to it, or it doesn't go off. And usually, almost always, the AccuWeather app gets me the warning faster than the NWS FCC WEA app. I don't know why that is, but it's true.
Wow. So, there's like a million other questions. How are we doing on time? Ooh, we're at 2. You're the longest.
We've been doing this 2 hours?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is really interesting
stuff. I could do this for 8 hours.
Well, I should shut up and let you guys talk.
No, I mean, I'm
Well,
actually.
I've already gone through 2 waters.
Do you want another one?
No,
or do you want to?
I am going to need to wrap up because I've got some stuff I need to do this afternoon.
And I'd like to chat for a minute off air, if you don't mind, for just a minute.
But this has gone so quickly. I would have guessed we were over an hour. I never would have guessed we were at 2 hours.
Oh, it's just, it flew by.
Yes.
I mean, like I said, I look at all. See, look, Mike, I do not mess around.
You have researched well.
I still have questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, look at all these. This would take a day.
Yeah.
I mean, so next time you come up to Kansas City, let's have lunch and we'll go through all this.
Okay.
Real quick, speaking of research, you're a little outspoken every now and then.
Me?
I know, not at all. On climate
me?
change.
Yes.
And being a Kansan, I'm sure you probably noticed we've got Mr. Mike Thompson in the Senate now.
Oh, did he get appointed?
He's in there.
Okay.
He's in there, and then he's got to. So he assumed that position, and then he's going to run for the position formally come this election cycle.
Well, my position on global warming is such that when I give a speech on it, and I try to avoid it,
Smart idea.
I know, because it's so debatable.
But I make both sides totally angry. My position, well, I don't know if it's good. My position is that global warming is a problem. And that global warming, and that we should cut the amount of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere.
Sure.
And that new generation nuclear is the way to decarbonize and to take people in Africa and other places that are in poverty, these new mobile, no risk, because the molten salt reactors are using such a low level of radioactivity.
Like in Germany.
Yeah. And Canada has put in an order for a bunch of them now.
Yeah.
For remote areas in northern Canada. The point is, we can solve this problem. We can do it fairly economically. However, there is no evidence, none, that tornadoes are getting worse. If anything, there's evidence they're getting less bad. There is no evidence hurricanes are increasing. There is no real evidence, if you look at the long term, not just a cherry-picked point in 1978, that wildfires are getting worse. There's no evidence in the United States that drought is getting worse. None. Yet you keep reading these things. You keep reading that the rate of increase in sea level is rapidly accelerating. That's not true. Look
Well,
at
and
the raw
plus-
data.
And plus, doesn't the Earth evolve and change?
Sure, the climate
always?
changes
So-
all the time.
Right. Well, we used to have glaciers in northwestern Missouri.
That's right.
Kansas used to be an inland ocean.
Yeah,
right.
we used to have an ocean here.
That's right.
You know,
You
if,
know, I
imagine if
mean-
we had actually seen those phenomenon with our own eyes and not just from geological
That's why I
research.
still like to go
our minds would be
fossil.
blown right now.
Because there are so many meteorologists who listen to this podcast, let me give you a challenge.
Sure. Bring it.
Go look at the Palmer Drought Index for August 1934
Okay, good.
and 1933.
Excellent.
And you will find the United States is in severe drought from Nevada and Arizona all the way to Pennsylvania.
Right.
Severe drought.
Yes. Is that
If
Dust Bowl era?
If that that was during the Dust Bowl
Yeah.
era, yes. If that happened today, Al Gore and his minions would be going nuts, nuts about this being caused by global warming.
Well, and I think that's where a lot of that conversation went south, is that Al Gore became the mouthpiece for that. And, you know, with Gore, you know, a lot of my skepticism with the name Gore started in 1985 with the PMCA, with Tipper Gore.
Right.
Censoring, you know,
Right.
John Denver,
Right.
Zappa.
Right.
And so when Gore...
John Denver?
Yes.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah.
a big thing. And so anyway, when he became the mouthpiece of global warming, I immediately had skepticism ears on. I'm like, wait, you're not a Met.
And he had
Well,
a $1
actually,
million mansion.
He released his grades from Harvard during his presidential campaign, and I looked it up. I found his transcripts. He took one class called natural science. That was the only science class he took in his 4 years, and he got a D, as in dog.
Ooh,
And so Al knows nothing about any
Sure.
of this.
sure.
So the problem I have is the people who call it a hoax don't like me,
Sure.
because I think there are things we need to do
You
about
seem
it.
like a moderate on
And
this.
well, yeah, but moderate in global warming is the worst place to be. And the alarmists don't like me because for example, it's clearly shown that a modern coal plant in Africa would produce far less carbon dioxide and be far more healthful for people than cooking dung to cook their meals, which is what they do.
They do.
Absolutely. And so the point is, I'd much rather than put a modern new generation nuclear in there, but if they can't, they're better off with coal. Man, that gets the Sierra
Yeah,
Club and
everybody
those
freaks out.
people furious, even though they agree with me, the science supports it. We shouldn't have any more coal plants.
No, they want solar and wind.
Right, which don't work on the large scale.
No, it's great for small.
Well,
It's
when
great
I
for
went
your roof.
to Germany, I saw a lot of new plans for their energy.
Right.
And of course, they also had a lot of solar panels.
Right.
And they were when I went to stay with my ex, my first husband's dad, who was from the Army, and he stayed in Kaiserslautern. And it was a law to recycle, and not just recycle like we did where we put out in the blue box.
Right.
You had to separate
Yeah.
each
Yeah.
type.
Even though that doesn't do any good for anybody.
No, but I mean, their grass was the greenest I've ever seen. Their soil was the blackest. No littering. I never saw
Yeah,
any
yeah,
litter.
yeah.
Everything was beautiful and clean.
Yeah.
You know, so I thought, why aren't we paying attention to what they're doing and take some lessons?
Absolutely.
You know?
I do need, my voice is starting to
Okay,
show.
well,
sure.
we're going to
Yeah, so-
wrap.
I apologize.
Not a problem.
So should I do, we're not worthy
No.
now?
Look,
Okay.
I have enjoyed this immensely.
Oh,
This
I
has
have
been a
too,
lot of fun.
Mike. Seriously.
and-
Likewise, Mike. It's been awesome for you to come.
I'd like you to come back again.
I'd
and-
love to.
And I saw in your thing that I was going to ask you, have you ever thought about writing fiction? But then I saw your bio.
Yeah, I'm working on a fiction book. And so
So there will be a character named after me, right? And
let me
she's
see
going to
what
be a
I can-
vixen.
Let me see what I can work out about that, okay?
Make me a nice noir vixen.
Well,
type.
I do have a character in the book who's a vixen. Her name is Kiki.
Oh.
K-I from a Hawaiian background.
Oh,
and so
cool.
there is a
I could do
vixen
that.
in there. But she's a very realistic vixen, as you'll find out when hopefully the book is published.
Wait, you will keep us informed. And,
You bet.
And well, plus, let's just keep in touch anyways.
You got it.
You promise?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh, Mike, this has been Such a joy. You
Well,
have no
it's
idea.
been my pleasure. Thank you.
And you gave us so much great information. And I highly, again, people, please, now this is out of print. So
Yeah, you can only get the ebook.
Get the ebook,
Right.
though. I highly recommend it. It is such a great, easy read. Do you need? Okay.
I'm just going to read the title, When the Sirens Were Silent.
When the Sirens Were Silent,
Mike
about
Smith.
Joplin. It's
And his
not
book
very
on
big.
warnings is very
And
good,
his
too.
book on warnings,
So-
I'm telling you, I collect a lot of books, and this is not technical. It's the stories laid in with the info makes it such an easy flow and easy read that I ended up reading it twice and took notes. So highly recommend both books. Cannot
Thank you.
stress that
Thank
enough.
you very much.
Well, that's a
And
wrap. Wow.
always check out, Mike, your blog or your website.
Yes, it's Mike Smith Enterprises blog.com.
Very good. MikeSmithEnterprisesBlog.com.
Right.
Got it. And we'll put that up on our website too. So or on our
Okay.
Facebook page. Mike Smith,
Thank you
so
the
much.
man. And his first boss, and he said he used to admire you when he was a child. He's like, I want to be Mike Smith. Seriously. And I'll tell you what, you all could be related.
Well,
So,
that's true.
and
That's true. Lots
again,
of similarities.
again, thanks again. And
Really appreciate it.
I guess we're out, and
Yeah.
we have no more guests. You're going to start pulling out the.
Yeah, we're gonna start
Sorry, we're doing a
roll-
little bit of business here.
Yeah,
real
we're going
quick.
to start rolling out some of the ChaserCon
Chaser
episodes.
cons,
Yep.
and then we will, us three, do because we're going to California next month to go see our friends, and
Right.
then but we'll do. I think we should do a three of us and kind of talk about the storm season.
However we
Mike,
do
if
it.
you want to come
Yeah.
up and
Oh,
join us, you're more than
no.
welcome.
I don't do no long range forecast.
Oh no, we're not doing any
No.
forecasting. We're just going to talk about what we kind of think and how's it going to be this year, and not only just that, just like with traffic and chasers and idiots, stuff that pisses me off.
Rivers.
So, but anyways,
Yeah.
thanks again, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Pleasure. Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
you have a good day.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for
you.
tuning in. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Libs Indirect. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Have a great day.
And what the man
weather.
said.
And whattheweatherpodcast.com.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Peace.
Peace.